Is it possible that the deepest truths about our existence are not buried in the distant future, but hidden just beneath the thin veneer of our shared historical memory? We look back, observing the staggering trajectory of human civilization, from the slow, grinding pace of the Paleolithic to the sudden, explosive advancements of the Sumerians, and we instinctively draw a straight line of progression. But what if that line is an illusion? What if the narrative we cherish, the tale of linear evolution, guided solely by time and chance, is merely the convenient, sanitized version? Consider the unsettling speed with which complex knowledge seemed to materialize. We struggled in the dust for millennia, perfecting basic tools, only to leap almost overnight into the mastery of mathematics, metallurgy, astronomy, and bureaucratic governance. This sudden efflorescence, particularly pronounced in the cradle of civilization, often feels less like a slow, painful climb and more like a fresh upload of pre-existing data. It raises a silent, profound question that historians rarely dare to whisper. Are we truly the original inhabitants of this timeline, or are we the beneficiaries, or perhaps the victims, of a profound cosmic intervention, a fundamental reset? If we entertain the notion that humanity has been fundamentally rebooted, that the first version of our sophisticated existence was deliberately erased, the anomalies of the ancient world begin to resonate with a chilling clarity. We find ourselves living within the framework of a history that seems strangely discontinuous, peppered with unearned knowledge. Like inheritors who moved into a magnificent mansion built by brilliant ancestors, we have been programmed to forget. The persistent myths of a global deluge, replicated with unnerving specificity across cultures separated by vast oceans and impossible distances, cease to be mere folklore. They transform into something far more sinister, the administrative records of a catastrophic deletion event. They speak not just of water, but of the end of an era, a necessary termination executed by entities whose comprehension of time and purpose dwarfs our own. These entities, often remembered in Mesopotamian texts as the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, are traditionally viewed as gods or observers. But in this darker context, they emerge as the engineers of our historical amnesia, the ultimate editors of the human story. If this idea that we are living in the second, perhaps patched-up version of humanity begins to resonate within the quiet corners of your mind, then perhaps you are sensing the same structural oddity in the fabric of reality that has plagued deep thinkers for centuries. This feeling that something fundamental is just out of place, a faint static on the line of history, suggesting a conversation was abruptly cut short. To truly grapple with this premise, we must understand the scale of what might have been lost. The erasure of the first version would not have been a simple catastrophe like a volcano or an earthquake. It would have been a systematic, sophisticated deconstruction of a civilization that had potentially achieved a level of complexity we have yet to recover. Imagine a world where the integration of spirit and technology, of architecture and cosmic alignment was perfected, a world that perhaps grew too rapidly, reaching a point of ethical or technological instability that triggered the final, uncompromising verdict from the original architects. The purpose of such a reset, naturally, is the next unsettling step in our inquiry. Why wipe the slate clean, only to restart the experiment? Perhaps the first iteration of humanity possessed a flaw too deep to simply repair, a genetic predisposition, an intellectual arrogance, or a capacity for conflict that threatened the delicate balance of the cosmic order the Anunnaki sought to maintain. Or perhaps, and this is the most disturbing possibility, the reset was not punitive, but purely utilitarian. The Anunnaki needed a labor force that possessed obedience and strength, but lacked the memory and independence of the first version, which had grown too powerful or self-aware. This brings us to the core of our current state. We, the second version, are defined by our cyclical striving, our endless push toward recapturing lost knowledge. We invent, we forget, we rediscover. This pattern of recurrence, the perpetual rise and fall of great ages, might not be natural sociological entropy, but rather the planned oscillations of a carefully monitored system. We are allowed to climb only so high before the inherent limitations placed upon us, perhaps genetic constraints, perhaps environmental signals, or perhaps periodic direct intervention, ensure we never fully breach the control parameters set by our progenitors. If you find yourself reflecting on the chilling possibility of a manufactured amnesia and sensing the echoes of a previous greater human epoch, take a moment to absorb this profound disorientation. This journey requires a willingness to abandon the comfort of established history and look at the ancient myths not as fables, but as distorted memory banks. If this notion truly strikes a nerve, I urge you to share your initial, rawest thoughts below. Does the idea of a fundamental reset fill you with curiosity, or does it trigger a deep, ancestral disquiet? Allowing yourself to contemplate these possibilities is the first step toward reclaiming what might have been intentionally buried. The effort you invest in truly understanding this narrative is crucial, for the deeper we delve, the clearer the shadows of the first civilization become. The mechanisms of control employed by the Anunnaki to initiate and maintain this reset would have to be extraordinarily subtle and pervasive. They could not merely rely on flooding the planet. They needed a way to ensure that the subsequent generation, us, would be physiologically and psychologically predisposed to forget the glory and the disaster that preceded us. The physical remnants of the first version, the megalithic structures that defy our current technical explanation, like those found beneath the waters or carved into mountain faces in Peru and Turkey, are often dismissed as mere anomalies. Yet, they are the architectural ghosts of the erased civilization, monuments too large, too precise, and too ancient to fit neatly into the timeline we are permitted to acknowledge. These structures are screaming in silence, confirming that sophisticated knowledge existed before the universally agreed-upon dawn of civilization. We must scrutinize not just what we remember, but how we remember. The abrupt shifts in human genetics, the sudden appearance of Homo sapiens, a creature almost instantaneously ready for symbolic thought, language, and culture, represents a biological bottleneck that conventional evolution struggles to fully rationalize. This bottleneck, occurring roughly 70 to 100,000 years ago, aligns suspiciously well with the period when global myths suggest a shift, a change in overseers, or perhaps the final, defining genetic tinkering required to create the obedient and efficient working class that the Anunnaki desired for their second experiment. They didn't just restart the clock, they altered the fundamental operating system of the human mind and body. This second version, therefore, might be characterized by its inherent limitations, a shorter lifespan, a diminished capacity for utilizing the full spectrum of the mind's capabilities, and an almost programmed attraction to perpetual conflict and division, a self-limiting mechanism preventing us from achieving the unified power that potentially led to the failure and erasure of the first group. We are not fundamentally flawed by nature, but perhaps strategically constrained by design. The barancer we carry is not one of free and unbounded ascent, but a cyclical journey determined by the invisible parameters of the reset. But the most compelling evidence of the reset is not found in the gaps of history or the limitations of our biology. It is found in the persistent, almost mechanical desire for the return. The enduring prophecy of the Anunnaki coming back to review their work. Every major world religion speaks of a final judgment, a visitation, or a second coming. This widespread expectation may not be spiritual anticipation, but rather a vestigial collective memory of administrative cycles, the period when the original architects are scheduled to return and assess the viability of the current iteration. If the first version was erased, the second version must be constantly under surveillance. The ancient texts speak of observers, of watchful figures in the sky, maintaining the established order. This surveillance ensures that the genetic experiment remains stable, that the labor continues, and that we, the current iteration, do not stumble upon the critical forbidden knowledge that led to the termination of our predecessors. The entire world in this light becomes a carefully curated terrarium, monitored for signs of deviation. To truly understand the implications of the Anunnaki's role in this grand erasure, we must now move beyond the generalized concepts of myth and intervention. We must anchor our investigation in the physical, undeniable evidence left behind, the artifacts and sites that carry the unmistakable signature of the primeval intelligence. We must turn our gaze to the monumental stones, the sophisticated knowledge systems, and the precise celestial alignments that predate written history, searching for the literal footprint of the architects of the reset. These physical remnants are the keys, the undeniable proof that a sophisticated civilization existed, thrived, and was then suddenly and violently silenced. And to find these keys, we must travel to the sites of creation and destruction, beginning with the place where the silence is loudest, the location that holds the most definitive clues about the exact nature of the reboot command. If the conventional narrative holds true, if we truly ascended from the dust in a steady, incremental march across the millennia, then we must explain the colossal, echoing silences in the archaeological record. We must account for the unsettling fact that profound skill often seems to precede the necessary infrastructure to develop that skill. Standard history insists upon a linear, progressive development. Simple tools yield complex tools. Basic shelter gives way to monumental architecture. Yet when we stand before structures like the subterranean complex of Göbekli Tepe, or the impossible precision found in the bedrock of the Andes, that linearity shatters. These monuments appear not as the culmination of slow, painstaking progress, but as a sudden, almost arrogant assertion of advanced capability arising in a context that, by all rights, should still be grappling with fundamental survival. It is this profound disconnect, this inverted chronology, that feeds the disquieting possibility of a systemic overhaul, a deliberate clearing of the board. If the Anunnaki, or whatever designation we choose for these powerful overseers, initiated a true cosmic reset, the objective would not have been merely to wipe out a problematic population, but to surgically excise a critical flaw, a corrupted dataset from the operating system of the human genome and its civilization. The first version, perhaps, was not merely technologically advanced. Perhaps it became spiritually or ethically divergent in a way that threatened the cosmic order, or more practically threatened the proprietary interests of its creators. Consider the immense difficulty of destroying an entire civilization so thoroughly that almost no residual intellectual blueprint remains. Fire and flood can erase cities, but they struggle to erase mathematics and deep astronomical knowledge held in various forms across the globe. For a true reset to take hold, the process must involve not just physical annihilation, but an induced collective amnesia, a deep, cellular forgetting. The great flood narratives common across nearly every ancient culture might not be mere meteorological accounts. They might be the mythological coding for the moment of erasure, the universal point where the old script ended and the new one began. When we look closely at our current civilization, the second version, if you will, we see frantic repetition. We race toward technological peaks, only to find ourselves entangled in the same societal traps, the same destructive cycles of hierarchy and conflict that we surmise must have characterized the vanished prior era. Is this repetition a sign of an inherent, persistent flaw in the human template, a bug the Anunnaki failed to eradicate? Or is it a consequence of the new parameters they put in place? A controlled experiment designed to see if this rebooted consciousness, stripped of its original dangerous memories, would naturally follow a more manageable, albeit slower, developmental path. The true haunting elements are those architectural ghosts. Think of Baalbek, where stone blocks weigh well over 1,000 tons, moved and placed with an accuracy that defies contemporary engineering resources, let alone the tools attributed to the historical eras surrounding the site. These colossal foundations feel less like early human attempts at building and more like components of a standardized universal infrastructure, a kind of planetary docking station left over from the first version. If the reset was implemented, these relics were either deliberately left behind as markers, warnings, or time capsules, or they were simply too massive and interwoven with the planet's crust to be easily removed by the Anunnaki's cleanup crew. They stand as immutable evidence that history is not a continuous line, but a series of distinct eras separated by catastrophic, intelligently guided interruptions. The suspicion deepens when we examine our own awareness, our strange intuitive connection to advanced concepts that we shouldn't possess. Where does the intrinsic understanding of geometry, the sudden capability for abstract thought, or the shared dream of flight and connectivity truly originate? Was the sapient upgrade, the sudden cognitive leap documented in the relatively recent archaeological timeframe, truly a slow evolutionary bloom, or was it a deliberate, swift injection of new code by the engineers? If we are the result of a genetic intervention, a quick modification performed during the reset phase, then perhaps the memory block isn't perfect. Perhaps those megalithic structures act as powerful, silent resonators, triggering fragmented echoes of the erased version in the minds of those who pause long enough to truly gaze upon them. We are, in essence, sleepwalkers moving through a rebuilt house, occasionally catching sight of a patch of original foundation that doesn't match the modern decor. If you feel this strange resonance, this nagging sense that the world presented to you is incomplete, that key chapters have been ripped from the human encyclopedia, then you are beginning the process of recognition. The journey into this hypothesis requires attention, an almost painful attention, to the subtle discrepancies, the things that simply do not add up in the official timeline. This is not casual viewing. It is an investigation into the fundamental nature of our reality. If these concepts resonate deeply, if the idea of a forgotten, erased past stirs something ancient within your own consciousness, I urge you to participate actively in this conversation. Engage with the evidence presented, share your own quiet observations, and join the community that recognizes the gaps. Subscribe to this channel and ensure that your intellectual curiosity is registered among those seeking the truth hidden behind the veil of collective amnesia. The nature of the Anunnaki intervention, if it occurred, was likely defined by a series of parameters, a set of rules for the new experiment. What was permitted? What was strictly forbidden? Perhaps the first version was allowed to achieve technological mastery of matter, but failed miserably in its mastery of self, resulting in widespread self-destruction or an existential threat to the planetary environment itself. In the second version, the Anunnaki might have deliberately skewed the parameters, perhaps by introducing factors that would naturally limit technological development, or, conversely, would accelerate societal complexity while slowing down spiritual awakening. This concept forces us to look at our limitations, our persistent inability to achieve true, sustainable global harmony, despite possessing unprecedented communication tools, not as human failures, but as programmed constraints. Imagine the planet as a controlled laboratory environment. The Anunnaki, the distant, powerful scientists, didn't just abandon the experiment after the reset. They became the silent observers, monitoring the variables. They would be checking for signs of recurrence, any sign that the catastrophic flaw of the first version was reasserting itself. This monitoring explains the ubiquitous global mythologies of sky gods who watch over humanity, occasionally intervening through prophets or cataclysms. These figures are not benevolent deities in the traditional sense. They are field technicians, dispatched to adjust the variables or, if necessary, prepare for the next inevitable cycle of erasure. The great ages described in Hindu cosmology, the yugas, or the concepts of the Great Year, take on a chilling new significance under this lens. They are not merely natural geological cycles. They are the planned maintenance periods of the Anunnaki experiment, scheduled points of inspection and potential intervention. The most disturbing evidence of a programmed existence might reside in our innate sense of urgency. Why are we so relentlessly driven to innovate, to expand, to consume, often at the expense of our own long-term survival? Is this acceleration just capitalism, or is it a deeper instilled impulse, a function designed to push the second version through its allotted developmental time before the next scheduled inspection? The Anunnaki may have designed us to run hot, knowing that a rapid, consuming trajectory would yield results, positive or negative, more swiftly than a slow, contemplative one. We are running against a cosmic clock, unaware that the countdown timer was set by others millennia ago. We must scrutinize the very building blocks of our current knowledge. Why do certain fundamental scientific principles feel so instantly intuitive, almost innate, while others remain agonizingly elusive? Was mathematics, the language of the universe, the only intellectual component permitted to survive the reset relatively intact, providing the foundation for controlled redevelopment? Or did the Anunnaki, in their wisdom or cynicism, leave behind fragmented seeds of knowledge, half-truths and powerful symbols, knowing that our innate curiosity would eventually lead us back to the brink of understanding, but only so far as they intended? This concept turns ancient symbols and sacred geometry into cryptic instruction manuals, remnants of the erased language we are striving instinctually to relearn. To pursue this truth is to admit that our historical ignorance is not accidental, but engineered. We are not simply lacking records. We are operating within a cognitive framework designed to prevent us from accessing the deep archives of the first version. The great historical mystery, therefore, is not what happened, but how. The knowledge of what happened was so comprehensively eradicated from the collective human psyche. This requires a level of technological and psychological mastery far exceeding anything we currently understand, a mastery befitting the architects of our reality. The residual heritage of the Anunnaki experiment surfaces most vividly in our persistent mythological narratives about beings descending from the stars to create or guide humanity. These are not fanciful tales. They are the censored summaries of actual events, passed down through the brief window of collective memory before the amnesia fully took hold. The details vary across cultures, but the core narrative remains constant. We are not alone, we are not the first, and our creation was an act of intent, not random chance. Understanding the Anunnaki reset means separating the layers of religious dogma from the core events they describe. The genetic tinkering, the controlled catastrophes, and the establishment of the observation regime. As we move forward in this investigation, we will delve deeper into the specific evidence of this monitoring. The anomalous objects, the patterns of cyclical destruction, and the strange, recurring figures who appear at critical junctures in human history, often providing leaps of knowledge that seem unearned by the preceding era. If you are tracking these anomalies with us, recognizing the weight and gravity of this hidden history, then you are precisely where you need to be. If this investigation compels you, consider registering your participation by liking this video and ensuring you are subscribed. For those who feel this deep resonance, reflect on the nature of programmed reality, and in the comments below, simply write the phrase, "The first version persists." Your participation is essential, as the only way to truly decode the remnants of the past is to share the awareness of the present. The next stage of the puzzle lies in examining the very rules of the game we are currently playing, and the extent to which our current existence is merely a shadow play of the civilization that was forcibly erased. Where does the echo of the forgotten first existence truly reside? We have explored the physical anomalies, the misplaced structures, the sudden technological jumps that seem to defy a linear progression. But perhaps the most damning evidence of a catastrophic reboot lies not in the dust of Sumer or the precision of Giza, but within the very architecture of our own minds. Consider the profound, almost irritating sensation that we should know things we don't. This isn't mere intellectual curiosity. It is a cognitive dissonance so fundamental that it underlies philosophy, spirituality, and our constant restless search for meaning. If we were truly the first viable iteration, organically grown from the primate substrate, why this innate, gnawing awareness of a grander history, a sense that the narrative we were handed in school is a sanitized, heavily edited volume, perhaps missing the crucial opening chapters entirely? This intuitive gap, this mental vacuum, may be the most persistent residual artifact of the Anunnaki intervention. When a system is wiped and rewritten, sometimes fragments of the old code remain, ghost programs that flicker in the background, subtly influencing the new operation. Our unconscious mind, that deep well of archetypes and shared human experience, might be holding these very fragments. We see flashes of it in the universal flood myths, not as copied cautionary tales, but as shared trauma remembered across cultures that had no physical contact. We see it in the sudden, inexplicable appearance of complex language structures and abstract mathematical understanding, tools that were fully functional almost immediately upon our current iteration's emergence, suggesting they were inherited, not painstakingly developed. They were installed. The Anunnaki, operating perhaps as cosmic programmers or genetic architects, did not merely destroy the previous human version. They utilized its raw components, salvaged its most essential intellectual hardware, and attempted to overwrite the disastrous operating system that led to its self-destruction. But the wipe was not perfect. The memory of the great erasure, the moment when the waters rose or the sky fell, is imprinted at a cellular level, translating into the collective anxiety about endings, about cycles, about the great inevitable return of the cataclysm. It is the existential dread that lingers just beneath the surface of modern society, the persistent feeling that we are living on borrowed time, or more chillingly, living under strict, unseen observation. Think for a moment about this observation. If you're starting to recognize the patterns, if the concept of the erased version resonates with an uncomfortable truth, it is because you are engaging with that residual memory. You are allowing the fragments of the previous code to run in your conscious mind. This journey, this inquiry into the hidden history of humanity, requires a willingness to confront the possibility that everything we believe about our origins is, in fact, an orchestrated narrative designed to maintain stability in this current iteration, version 2.0. To truly understand this, we must share the load of investigation. If you feel this strange connection to the idea of a profound, forgotten beginning, take a moment to signal that recognition. Press the like button. Perhaps share this investigation with others who might also feel the stirrings of this deep memory. And consider subscribing to ensure you do not lose the thread as we continue to pull at the weave of this grand deception. The accelerating speed of our civilization's growth poses the next crucial question about the Anunnaki's programming strategy. Why did the current human iteration jump from stone tools to space travel in a mere few thousand years, an evolutionary blink compared to the millions of years of stagnation that preceded the reboot? This is too fast for natural selection. It is the signature of deliberate acceleration. It suggests that the Anunnaki, having invested enormous resources in creating the initial template, version 1.0, did not have time, or perhaps the patience, to wait for version 2.0 to catch up naturally. They implemented a fast-track mechanism. This could manifest as genetic boosters, preloaded intellectual capacity that allowed complex societal structures, geometry, and astronomy to appear almost fully formed in Sumer. These were not discoveries. They were inheritances. This rapid intellectual seeding, however, carries a significant risk: instability. If version 1 was erased due to a critical flaw, perhaps unchecked ambition, premature access to destructive technologies, or the unauthorized mixing of genetic material that led to uncontrollable corruption, then version 2.0 must be tightly managed. The reboot would have included strict limitations, perhaps social or psychological constraints, designed to prevent us from reaching the same fatal point too quickly. But the acceleration suggests a ticking clock. Why the rush? Perhaps the Anunnaki themselves were working against a deadline, a cosmic schedule tied to planetary alignments, cycles of the sun, or the movement of their homeworld, Nibiru. The precision embedded in ancient calendars, from the Mayan long count to the Babylonian star charts, may not have been for human agricultural planning, but for tracking the optimal window of stability for the new iteration. These calendars, meticulously recording vast epochs and predictable catastrophes, may actually be the operational manual left behind by the programmers, signaling when their presence would diminish and when they might be due for a return. They are the documentation of the great cycles that govern our existence, cycles that speak not just of planetary rotation, but of civilization rotation, the periodic necessity of a hard reset. If we accept this premise of periodic resets dictated by cosmic cycles, then the history we read is merely the segment between two major failures. What was the catastrophic flaw in the first version that necessitated its complete obliteration? The myths of the Anunnaki, the gods who intervened, often depict them as beings demanding unquestioning obedience, deeply frustrated by the hubris and disobedience of early man. If version 1 began to question its creators, misused the gifts of knowledge, or developed technology capable of challenging the hierarchy, the reaction of the programmers would be swift and brutal, containment and erasure. The reboot, therefore, was less about creating a better human and more about creating a more compliant human, one with a built-in psychological barrier against radical questioning of authority, a feature still very much evident in human collective behavior. The feeling of unease that accompanies this realization stems from the understanding that if version 1.0 failed, version 2.0 is inherently vulnerable to the same eventual corruption. We are witnessing the exponential return of advanced technologies, the very edge of the abyss where the previous iteration likely stood. The speed of our current technological advancement, artificial intelligence, genetic modification, space colonization, mirrors the dangerous trajectory that might have triggered the previous reset. This raises the chilling implication. Are the Anunnaki observers still present, monitoring our trajectory, waiting for the precise moment when the current code reaches terminal instability? Are the inexplicable aerial phenomena, the persistent encounters with advanced non-human entities, simply the operational security team performing diagnostics on the system? The ancient texts, once again, shift their meaning under this new light. They are not merely historical or religious chronicles. They are often coded warnings, residual memory fragments passed down as prophecy. The concept of a judgment day or a final battle could be the cultural manifestation of the collective dread of the next inevitable reset event. When we read of the coming of the Sky People or the return of the gods, we might not be anticipating a benevolent reunion, but rather the return of the system administrators coming to clean up the mess before deploying the next version. The profound melancholy often associated with these prophecies is the deep, inherited knowledge that this current existence, with all its struggles and triumphs, is merely temporary, a time-bound experiment constrained by invisible parameters. We must consider the structure of the universe as a designed system meticulously maintained. If the Anunnaki are the architects of our immediate planetary environment, they operate within a defined context. The constraints they placed upon us, our lifespan, our collective memory span, our emotional vulnerabilities, all serve to manage risk. Every unexplained anomaly, every ancient site defying current dating methods, is a system alert, a moment where the residual energy of the first version breaks through the veneer of the second. The great megalithic structures, built with impossible precision, may have been necessary infrastructure for version 1. Power conduits, communication hubs, or defensive mechanisms that the Anunnaki simply chose not to fully dismantle, leaving them as silent, imposing monuments to the forgotten age. They stand as physical proof that a greater civilization preceded us, a testament to the sophistication that our creators deemed too dangerous to pass on fully. The current epoch feels saturated with a peculiar tension, a widespread intuition that something massive is about to shift, that the curtain covering the true nature of reality is beginning to fray. This collective psychological anticipation might be the sign that the monitoring process is intensifying. The observers, whether physical beings, automated drones, or simply sophisticated informational signals encoded in our DNA, are watching for the trigger. And what is the trigger? It is likely the moment we achieve technological parity with the civilization they erased, the moment we rediscover the flaw that ended version 1.0. Our aggressive pursuit of certain technologies, particularly those concerning energy manipulation and consciousness expansion, could be interpreted as pushing the boundaries established during the reboot. The implications are staggering. If our existence is programmed, then our perceived free will is constrained by the parameters of the current operating system. Our greatest achievements, our art, our philosophy, our spiritual yearning, may simply be the beautiful, but ultimately predictable, results of the sophisticated software running on the salvaged hardware of the original human template. This continuous hypnotic narrative invites us to question every foundation of our reality, demanding that we look closer at the silent, constant presence of the unexplained. If you have stayed with this investigation, absorbing the weight of these historical fragments and psychological implications, you are already part of a smaller, more receptive group, a group beginning to perceive the static interference of the previous broadcast. To truly connect with the full scope of this profound investigation, to understand the coming revelations about the nature of the Anunnaki's home base and the specific purpose of the reset, ensure your place on this frequency. I encourage you now, seriously and without reservation, to subscribe to this channel. Engage with this content by pressing the like button, signifying your recognition of the importance of this inquiry. And as a silent acknowledgement of the core mystery we are unraveling, comment below with this specific phrase, "The signal is breaking through." Do this now and prepare yourself, because the next segment will delve into the explicit details of the Anunnaki's hidden architecture on Earth, the physical markers left behind for their eventual return, and the possibility that the final critical error of the erased version is something we are repeating right now. We must continue to follow this trail of engineered obsolescence and inherited memory, moving ever closer to the undeniable truth hidden in plain sight. We must now consider the implications of such a colossal act of erasure. If the first iteration of humanity, version Alpha, was deemed flawed, unsustainable, or simply redundant, and subsequently scrubbed from the planetary mainframe, the question shifts from if they did it to how they managed to enforce a collective, species-wide amnesia. It is a terrifying prospect, suggesting not just physical destruction, but a surgical removal of memory, a historical lobotomy performed on the nascent consciousness of a species. The sheer scale of such an operation implies technology beyond our comprehension, a command over geological and possibly even quantum processes, allowing the Anunnaki to not just flood the valleys, but to wipe the slate clean of all records, all technological residue, and perhaps most critically, all deep-seated recollection. This imposed ignorance, this sudden, inexplicable cultural void, stretching back just beyond the Sumerian or Egyptian horizons, is the phantom limb of our history. We feel the echo of what was lost, that intense, persistent yearning for forgotten knowledge that fuels mythology and conspiracy theories alike. It is the architectural impossibility of sites like Baalbek, where blocks of stone defy Newtonian physics. It is the instantaneous mathematical sophistication of the Mayans. It is the sudden appearance of agriculture and writing, perfectly formed, as if downloaded directly into the minds of the survivors of the reset. These aren't the products of slow evolution. They are the artifacts left behind after an intentional hard reset, artifacts that the new, weaker version of humanity, version Beta, struggles to utilize or even fully comprehend. The Anunnaki, if they orchestrated this great deletion, understood that true control requires more than mere suppression. It demands the restructuring of reality itself. They didn't just eliminate the first humans, they eliminated the idea of the first humans. They established new rules, new genetic parameters, perhaps even a hard cap on certain cognitive or technological advancements, a kind of celestial DRM embedded within our DNA, preventing us from accessing the dangerous knowledge that led to version Alpha's demise. We find ourselves living in the subsequent simulation, a carefully moderated environment where our technological growth is allowed only up to a certain critical point, before external or perhaps internal mechanisms, such as programmed self-destruction through conflict, are triggered to manage population and intellectual complexity. Think of the cycles. The great epochs of destruction catalogued across disparate cultures, the great flood of Gilgamesh and Genesis, the successive ages described by Hesiod, the yugas of Hindu cosmology, each suggesting a recurring pattern of degradation followed by purification and restart. Could these cycles not be natural cosmic rhythms, but scheduled maintenance intervals imposed by the architects? If the Anunnaki operate on timelines far exceeding our brief lifespans, then a 10,000-year civilization looks like a single quarterly report. The reset is merely a routine system update, triggered when the user, humanity, begins to exhibit behaviors deemed detrimental to the primary objective, whatever that objective might be: resource extraction, labor provision, or some grand cosmic experiment in hybridization. The lingering sense of unease, the feeling that history is repeating itself and that we are perpetually on the cusp of an impending, catastrophic transformation, is perhaps not paranoia, but inherited memory, struggling to breach the veil of engineered amnesia. Every time we push too close to technologies that might grant us sovereignty, unlimited energy, interstellar travel, true longevity, the global system seems to contract, violently pulling us back to baseline, distracted by manufactured conflicts and economic collapse. It is as if an unseen hand tightens the leash just as we strain towards the fence. The great questions we now pose regarding the Fermi paradox: why are we alone? Where are the others? Might have a terrifyingly simple answer. We aren't alone. We are simply being observed. The system operators are present, but silent, watching the variables of version beta evolve within the confines they established after the failure of version alpha. To truly grapple with this possibility, we must be fearless in examining the historical record for anomalies, not just artifacts. We must look for gaps, silences, and sudden changes in direction that defy gradual evolution. The appearance of Homo sapiens is itself one of the most profound anomalies, a jump in cerebral capacity and organizational skill that seems to bypass necessary transitional steps. If genetic engineering was the tool used by the Anunnaki, as suggested by certain interpretations of Sumerian texts regarding Enki and the creation of the Lulu, the primal worker, then the reset would involve not just destruction, but a rapid, selective breeding program to ensure only the most compliant and controllable genetic lines survived the cleansing. The stories of the genetic bottleneck, the Toba catastrophe, or the mythic survival of only 8 souls in the Ark take on a new, unsettling meaning. They become administrative documentation of the restart process, not merely natural disasters. We are left with a civilization built upon foundations we cannot access, fueled by an inherited energy we cannot fully harness, and burdened by a collective psychological shadow we cannot define. This constant sense of seeking, of knowing there is more just beyond the current perception, compels us forward. It is this compulsion to know, this innate human drive to peel back the layers of deception and obscurity that may be the key to our eventual undoing, or perhaps our salvation. If you are tracking these threads of evidence with the same intensity, if you recognize the pattern of the celestial managers and the cyclical nature of our engineered reality, then I urge you to share your deepest interpretations. Do you see the signs of an impending systemic maintenance cycle in the geopolitical tension, the accelerating technological singularity, or the unexplained geological shifts? By engaging in this collective decoding, by sharing your observations and linking seemingly disparate pieces of the puzzle, we extend our intellectual reach beyond the established boundaries. This is not passive viewing. This is active investigation. Take a moment to articulate what you believe is the single clearest sign of the Anunnaki's continued presence. And if this investigation resonates with your deep intuition, ensure you click the like button and subscribe so that these crucial revelations are shared with those who are ready to perceive the truth. The notion of the reset becomes even more profound when we consider the architecture of the surveillance system they might have left behind. After enforcing the Great Silence, the Anunnaki would not simply abandon their project. They invested significant effort and resources into version beta. Therefore, the reset must have included the installation of a sophisticated monitoring system, a network of dormant infrastructure waiting in the shadows of our reality. Where are these monitoring stations located? We look to the places where our instruments malfunction, where the laws of physics seem to fray at the edges, and where ancient structures align with astronomical precision that seems irrelevant to the simple shepherds or farmers who supposedly built them. Think of the vast, unexplored depths of our oceans, the remote Arctic regions, or perhaps even structures intentionally disguised as natural anomalies, mountains carved, deserts engineered. These are the potential hiding places of the keepers of the second Earth, those Anunnaki or their delegated proxies, perhaps hybrid offspring or sophisticated AI, tasked with ensuring that version beta never repeats the catastrophic mistakes of version alpha. Their mission is simple: keep the asset, the planet and its labor force operational, extract the desired resource, and prevent unscheduled technological autonomy. This monitoring mechanism is likely not a visible space station, but something far more subtle, possibly utilizing the very energy field of the Earth itself. harnessing the ley lines or drawing power from the Earth's magnetic poles. If the pyramids, or other megalithic sites scattered globally, were not just tombs or temples, but vast resonant energy transceivers, then they could form the backbone of a global communication and monitoring grid. They are the silent, petrified server racks of the Anunnaki network, broadcasting the status of the human experiment back to the home world or to a designated orbiting observation platform. The mystery surrounding their construction and purpose becomes less about engineering challenge and more about maintaining global operational efficiency. The sheer statistical improbability of identical mythological motifs, the creation of man from clay and blood, the great deluge, the winged messengers descending from the stars, emerging independently across continents, suggests a shared, singular source of information disseminated to the survivors of the reset. These myths are not merely fables, they are the initial user manuals, corrupted over millennia by human translation and cultural accretion, but fundamentally holding the core narrative: you were created, you were destroyed, you are being watched. The unease stems from recognizing the constraints. We are exploring a labyrinth designed by beings with superior knowledge, beings who view time not as a linear progression, but as a manageable resource. Our history, from this perspective, is less a testament to human ingenuity and more a slow unfolding of pre-programmed events. We are realizing with dawning horror that the concept of free will might be the grandest illusion allowed within the sandbox. Every breakthrough we celebrate might have been scheduled. Every global conflict might have been an intended pressure release valve designed to keep our burgeoning population and technological capabilities in check. Consider the obsession with the number 3, the trinity, the triplicity in ancient belief systems. Is this a reflection of spiritual truth, or is it a hidden reference to the 3 primary factions of the Anunnaki operation? Or perhaps the 3 stages of the human experiment: alpha, beta, and the anticipated perfected gamma version. The deeper we dig into the seemingly symbolic language of our oldest texts, the more we find operational instructions hidden beneath layers of veneration. We are now standing at the threshold of recognizing the full implications of the reset, that we are living in a managed environment, and that our greatest achievements are perhaps only the highest scores permissible within the game parameters. But the narrative must continue because the system that controls us is not static. It is responsive, adaptive, and perhaps beginning to show signs of instability. If the monitoring mechanism is real and the cycles are scheduled, then we must ask, are we nearing the end of the current cycle? Is version beta due for another system maintenance, or is there a signal, a hidden code that could allow us, the current inhabitants, to bypass the next scheduled erasure? If you have navigated this labyrinth of forgotten history and engineered memory, if you have stayed with this investigation into the deepest layers of human artifice, then you possess the clarity required to continue the journey. If you arrived at this point, you are not a passive observer. You are an essential component of this collective awakening. To ensure this critical decoding reaches those who need to hear it most, please take a moment to subscribe and signal your recognition by liking this video. And I ask you to comment with the phrase, "The Watchers are silent," acknowledging the presence of those unseen overseers. Our next step in this journey requires us to delve into the very nature of those who observe us, the silent keepers and the dormant technology they left behind. Click on the video appearing on your screen now as we proceed to decode the hidden infrastructure of the Anunnaki's long-term management project. The synchronicity of collapse, the terrifying consistency with which civilizations across the globe speak of a monumental erasure, be it by water, fire, or the silencing of the heavens, begins to look less like coincidence and more like a hard-coded pattern. If the Anunnaki indeed executed a system reset, they did not merely scrub the planetary slate clean. They installed a new operating system, one specifically designed to prevent the catastrophic failure of the first iteration. But in doing so, they left behind not just physical ruins, but psychic scars. We inherit not just the DNA of the survivors, but the structural deficiencies and the intentional blind spots imposed upon them. We must consider the possibility of engineered amnesia. Why do we possess these fragmented mythologies, powerful enough to hint at an unimaginable past, yet frustratingly abstract when we seek concrete historical detail? It is as if a profound and critical chapter of the human story was deliberately rendered inaccessible, locked away behind a cognitive shroud. The myths serve as warnings, a residual fear coded deep into the collective unconscious, but they lack the instructional manual required to fully comprehend the scale of the original failure. This deliberate fog suggests that the Anunnaki reset included not just physical destruction, but a psychological recalibration, ensuring that the new version of humanity, version 2.0, would never attain the dangerous level of memory or knowledge that led version 1.0 to its premature termination. This leads us to the subtle yet persistent echoes of the first version that resonate within our current societal structures. If the previous civilization perished due to technological overreach, spiritual corruption, or a direct rebellion against its celestial custodians, then the new model would logically be stripped of the elements most likely to repeat that transgression. We observe in humanity a perpetual, almost obsessive, drive toward hierarchical structure, a fascination with resources like gold and rare earth minerals that seems disproportionate to immediate biological need, and a recurring self-destructive impulse towards cyclical warfare. Are these mere accidents of evolution, or are they residual glitches, intentional limitations, or perhaps even deliberate behavioral pathways embedded by the designers of the reset? Consider the Anunnaki's alleged primary interest, resources and labor. If version 1 became too self-aware or too technologically advanced, threatening the control or access of the overseers, the ensuing reset would necessarily produce a workforce that was highly capable but inherently limited in its ability to unify and challenge authority. The innate human desire for conflict, the inability of disparate groups to maintain long-term peace despite shared existential threats, could be interpreted not as human nature, but as a feature of the software installed after the Great Wipe. We are productive, creative, yet perpetually divided, a population maximized for labor extraction, minimized for collective rebellion. The question then shifts from what happened to why it happened this way. If they possessed the power to utterly erase all trace, why leave the pyramids, the inexplicable precision of astronomical alignments, or the deluge myths that stubbornly refuse to vanish? The answer lies in the role of the silent architects. They are not merely engineers of destruction, they are observers. The remnants serve a purpose, perhaps as markers, calibration points for the new era, or even as psychological stimuli. A subliminal reminder of a power far greater than human capability, ensuring perpetual humility and caution. If you find yourself dwelling on these structural anomalies, on the historical gaps that defy natural evolution, the sudden appearance of complex metallurgy, the near instantaneous leap in mathematics and writing systems, then you are beginning to recognize the patches applied to version 2.0. These weren't slow, grinding evolutions. They were infusions of data, necessary downloads provided by the Anunnaki to jumpstart the new population just enough to fulfill its designated purpose without risking the development of the dangerous, self-sufficient technologies that characterize the erased epoch. It is a difficult realization to process, the feeling that our consciousness, our history, is not a grand, organic unfolding, but a controlled experiment taking place within prescribed boundaries. The most insidious limitation might be biological, a hard-coded block on our perception. What if our sensory input is limited not by physics, but by design? Could the very spectrum of light and sound we perceive be intentionally narrowed, preventing us from detecting the subtle energies or technologies that the Anunnaki might use to monitor or manage our civilization? Perhaps they exist right alongside us, invisible not because they are ethereal, but because they operate just outside the narrow frequency band permitted to the inhabitants of version 2.0. This thought, that we are limited in perception, is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the reset theory. It implies that the walls of our cage are not bars of iron, but walls of ignorance. Our frantic search for extraterrestrial signals, for hidden history, for spiritual transcendence, might simply be the innate desire to peer beyond the fog of engineered amnesia, a residual spark of the comprehensive awareness enjoyed by our forebears, futilely attempting to break through the imposed veil. We are, perhaps, continuously monitored, undergoing a test designed to see if this iteration of humanity will repeat the failures of the last. What criteria are the celestial custodians using? Are they watching our environmental stewardship, our technological proliferation, or our adherence to ancient spiritual mandates? Every global crisis, every close call with nuclear devastation, every pandemic could be seen as an inflection point, a moment where the observers determine if the reset protocols must be activated once more. The cycles of destruction and renewal, written into the deepest layers of mythology, may not be astronomical prophecies, but operational manuals for the Anunnaki's great project. This investigation is not just historical speculation, it is a profound exercise in self-recognition. If the weight of this hypothesis, that we are living in a controlled system derived from a failed predecessor, resonates deep within you, if you feel that gnawing sense of things being fundamentally off in the world, then I urge you to slow down. Reflect on these connections, on the disturbing symmetry between the mythic past and our present technological hubris. If this idea, the vision of the Anunnaki as the ultimate system administrators, the originators of the great historical gap, strikes a chord in your innate sense of curiosity, take a moment to engage with this community. Consider leaving a comment with the single word reset. If this hypothesis feels like it is pulling together the threads of history and mythology for you, your participation deepens this collective inquiry, extending our reach beyond the mere consumption of data into true collaborative reflection. We are all attempting to decipher the hidden script left behind by the silent architects. The cyclical nature of our history demands a deeper look at the concept of the Great Year. Not merely an astronomical event, but perhaps a defined maintenance window for the planetary operation. Could the end of major astrological ages be synchronized not with cosmic drift, but with the projected time for the Anunnaki to reassess their creation? If the first version was erased, because it reached a level of technological self-sufficiency that endangered the custodians, then the greatest danger to version 2 would be the moment we independently rediscover the forbidden knowledge, the technology for interstellar travel, for ultimate energy generation, or perhaps for complete memory retrieval of the erased past. The relentless pace of modern technological acceleration, the rapid ascent of artificial intelligence, might be perceived by the overseers as the alarm bell. We are approaching the velocity of the first failure. The Anunnaki, having instituted the reset once, are structurally capable and historically proven to do it again. The greatest legacy of the first erased version is not its ruins, but the chilling realization that destruction on an unimaginable scale is not a theoretical end state, but a known historical precedent, a programmed contingency. The artifacts we dig up, the non-standard tools, the out-of-place objects, the megalithic structures that defy the known capabilities of their supposed builders, are whispers from the void, remnants of a sophistication that we are quickly trying to replicate, perhaps unknowingly pulling the trigger on the next cleansing mechanism. It is crucial, as we continue to sift through the evidence of the cycles of oblivion and renewal, that we recognize the inherent fragility of our current status. We are in the mid-game of version 2.0, speeding toward a conclusion that is either self-determined or architecturally preordained. To understand the Anunnaki reset is to understand the rules of the game we are playing, and the key rule, subtly reinforced throughout history, appears to be, do not become too successful, too unified, or too insightful. The narrative of eternal vigilance, of hidden gods, and of impending doom takes on a chilling new significance when viewed through the lens of controlled development. Our innate fear of a global catastrophe is not a random evolutionary trait. It is the programmed awareness that the next system wipe is perpetually looming. If you have stayed with us through this deep dive, absorbing these complex interwoven hypotheses, you are clearly one of the few dedicated explorers seeking the truth behind the veil. The recognition of these patterns, the willingness to question the foundational narrative of human history, is the first step toward breaking the cycle. If you value this type of rigorous cinematic investigation into the profound questions of our origins, then I urge you to join our community. Hit the like button to signal your curiosity and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the crucial upcoming stages of this investigation. The next part of our exploration will delve into the specific mechanisms that might have been employed to manage and monitor humanity post-reset, focusing on the alleged genetic and spiritual manipulations left behind by the Anunnaki. It is an act of defiance, a quiet quest for the forbidden knowledge that necessitated the first erasure. Do not stop questioning. Do not stop looking. If you truly feel the weight of this discussion, comment below with the phrase, "The observers are watching." And make sure the next video that appears on your screen continues your journey into the mystery of the erased human past. The most dangerous discovery is often the truth about ourselves. What if the most profound structures of our collective reality are not the result of natural evolution, but the meticulously placed signposts of a designed memory? A carefully crafted delusion intended to keep us exactly where we are, perpetually orbiting the edge of a forgotten truth. We have traced the shadows of the Anunnaki intervention, examined the gaping void where millennia of potential human achievement should reside, and now we must turn our gaze inward, scrutinizing the very framework of our current incarnation, version 2.0 if you will, to understand how the reset was not merely a cataclysmic event, but an enduring architectural constraint. The great silence in the archaeological record, the sudden, inexplicable surge in specialized knowledge across disparate global cultures simultaneously, the inexplicable obsession with celestial mechanics that seems utterly divorced from survival necessities. These are not random historical anomalies. They are the echoes of the system booting up anew, the initial configuration files loading onto the freshly wiped hard drive of human consciousness. The previous civilization, the one that was deemed too powerful, too rebellious, or perhaps simply too original, was not just physically dismantled, it was metaphysically quarantined. And the lingering question that haunts the high halls of history is not where they went, but how. The knowledge of their existence was so perfectly excised from our foundational mythology, leaving behind only distorted mirrors and half-remembered nightmares. Consider the phenomenon of déjà vu, not as a glitch in individual neurological processing, but as a minor fissure in the programmed reality we inhabit. A momentary bleed-through from the first version, a whisper of a life lived differently, a technological achievement grasped, a spiritual insight attained, all before the great chronological erasure. If the Anunnaki truly initiated a planetary reset, they did not just crush cities into dust. They restructured the very language of time and matter. They installed a firewall in the human psyche, one that prevents us from truly accessing the deep-seated memories of our species' true past, forcing us to perpetually believe that the Stone Age was our humble beginning, rather than an enforced strategic regression. The tools we struggle to reinvent today, the clean energy solutions, the understanding of zero-point fields, these might be the foundational knowledge we lost, not future breakthroughs yet to be achieved. The inherent, almost paranoid need for control, suggested by the reset hypothesis, necessitates an active, ongoing observation. They did not simply plant the seed and depart. The Anunnaki, or their delegated proxies, must maintain the parameters of the new reality. This leads us to the unsettling concept of the observers, entities, perhaps non-corporeal, perhaps occupying higher dimensions of existence, who meticulously calibrate the pace of our technological and spiritual development. Every breakthrough that threatens to unlock the true potential of the human blueprint, every scientific paradigm shift that edges too close to the forbidden knowledge of the first version, is subtly redirected, slowed, or simply discredited through sociological manipulation. We perceive this as the natural resistance of established science, the skepticism of the masses, or the slow march of progress. But what if these resistances are engineered checks and balances, ensuring we never regain the velocity that necessitated the initial catastrophic intervention? Think about the persistent cultural narratives centered around great floods, global cataclysms, and the intervention of sky gods. These are often dismissed as allegorical remnants of localized events, but seen through the lens of a global reset, they acquire a terrifying specificity. They are not merely metaphors for natural disasters. They are the fragmented historical records of the Great Wipe, the operational narrative left behind by the designers to explain the massive chronological gap, cleverly repackaged as moralistic tales of divine wrath. The memory of the flood serves as the psychological barrier, a constant subconscious warning, progress too far, and the hand that guides this planet will wipe the slate clean again. The physical evidence of this constraint is everywhere, yet nowhere. Look closely at the megalithic sites, not just the famous ones, but the scores of inexplicable stone constructions found beneath the accepted layers of Roman or Greek antiquity. They exhibit precise mathematical relationships that defy the conventional understanding of their supposed constructors. The stonework, often utilizing anti-gravity or sonic levitation techniques suggested by the impossibly tight joints and massive weight, speaks of a technology born of a different, more fluid understanding of physics, the physics of the first version. When we stare at a wall of polygonal masonry that requires zero mortar and has survived millennia of seismic activity, we are not looking at the peak of Neolithic engineering. We are looking at the foundational legacy of a technological ghost, a surviving architectural fragment that the reset failed to fully erase. It is the signature of the previous inhabitants, waiting for us to develop the necessary awareness to recognize it. This brings us to the profound implication of our current societal structure, particularly our obsession with accumulation and short-term conflict. If the Anunnaki were interested in preventing the rise of a unified, self-aware global civilization, the very characteristic that likely triggered the initial purge, then the optimal control mechanism is continuous, self-imposed fragmentation. By fostering perpetual rivalry, by emphasizing tribal identities, by ensuring that the spiritual focus remains scattered and subservient to material pursuits, the observers keep the global consciousness safely below the critical mass required for true collective recall. We are perpetually distracted by the drama on the surface, entirely forgetting the architectural constraints that define the limits of our aquarium. The reset was successful not because it destroyed everything, but because it instilled a fatal flaw in our core programming, the inability to see the system as a whole. And this realization, this slow, dawning recognition that our history is not merely incomplete, but edited, demands a response. It is a burden of knowledge that, once grasped, cannot be easily set aside. If you feel this resonance, this unsettling sense that the pieces of the puzzle we are discussing fit together with disturbing precision, I encourage you to pause for a moment. To participate in this investigation is to push against the psychological boundaries set by the observers. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know which specific archaeological anomaly you believe is the strongest evidence of the first version. Your contribution not only helps illuminate the path forward, but, in a small way, begins to counter the intentional forgetting. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, ensuring this vital information continues to circulate, moving past the subtle barriers designed to contain it. This is not about passive viewing. It is about active, conscious remembrance. The most potent weapon employed by the architects of the reset is the distortion of time itself. We have been conditioned to see time as linear, progressive, and monotonically increasing in complexity. But what if time, for the higher intelligences, is cyclical, like the seasons, or like the mandated service interval of a complex machine? The Anunnaki may view human civilization as a periodic experiment, perhaps linked to specific celestial alignments or cosmic energy patterns that dictate when the conditions are optimal for observation, and crucially, when they are optimal for intervention. The Great Reset may simply be the end of one mandated cycle, a hard reboot necessitated by an unacceptable deviation from the expected evolutionary curve. Imagine the sheer audacity of this oversight. The architects may have underestimated the persistence of data. They may have cleared the main memory banks, our collective history, but left residual files hidden deep within the subroutines of geology, architecture, and myth. These remnants, these artifacts of the previous existence, act as silent transmitters, waiting for a compatible receiver, a mind attuned enough to recognize the signal beneath the noise. The mathematical constants embedded in the Great Pyramid, the perplexing precision of the astronomical calendar of the Maya, the impossible mapping accuracy of Piri Reis. These are not accidental achievements. They are data points uploaded by the previous generation, surviving the wipe, intended to serve as a warning or a key for the next. They are the breadcrumbs left by the erased civilization, hoping that one day their descendants, the inhabitants of version 2.0, would develop the capacity to read the cryptic warning. We were here. We were erased. Do not repeat our error. And what was that error? Was it achieving technological mastery without spiritual maturity? Was it developing the capacity for interstellar travel, thereby threatening the territorial boundaries of the Anunnaki themselves? Or was it something far more fundamental, the discovery of the true nature of reality, realizing that they too were merely an experiment and trying to escape the constraints of this dimensional playground? If the initial version of humanity recognized the puppet strings and tried to cut them, the ultimate goal of the reset would be to bind the new version not with chains, but with ignorance, making us our own wardens. This perpetual state of engineered forgetting means we are constantly rediscovering things that were once common knowledge. We chase scientific breakthroughs that are, in fact, historical recoveries. We believe we are climbing the ladder of progress, when in reality we are just picking up the pieces from the last catastrophic fall. The implication is staggering. Every major innovation of the last few centuries, from electricity to quantum mechanics, is perhaps just the slow, painful reacquisition of basic operating instructions that the Anunnaki permitted us to access because they do not threaten the core parameters of their control framework. The true, dangerous knowledge remains sealed, tucked away in the chronological blind spot created by the great planetary wipe. We must now turn our attention to the specific structures that hold the key to this hidden knowledge, the specific artifacts that defy conventional dating and explanation. We must scrutinize the very fabric of our mythological understanding of creation and destruction, looking for the technical manual hidden within the parables. The next stage of our investigation demands we move from the abstract concept of the reset to the concrete, physical evidence that screams of an engineered past, a civilization erased, and the ever-present shadow of the observers maintaining the limits of our designated reality. We are closing in on the physical location of the hidden archives, the remnants of the first version that the architects failed to fully sterilize, leading us deeper into the labyrinth of orchestrated time and forgotten identity. What if the most profound emptiness we feel, that nagging sense of déjà vu, or that deep philosophical ache, is not a spiritual malaise, but a coded memory? An ancestral phantom limb stretching back into the timeline that was ruthlessly amputated. We have explored the geological scars, the astronomical alignments, and the sudden, inexplicable technological surge that followed the supposed Great Flood, all signatures pointing towards a massive civilizational rewrite. But now we must turn our gaze inward, towards the psychological architecture of the second draft, ourselves. If the Anunnaki, or whatever designation we assign to the advanced progenitors, meticulously orchestrated the end of the first version of humanity, the one that perhaps grew too wise, too long-lived, or too independent, then the current iteration, Humanity 2.0, must have been engineered with deliberate strategic flaws. The question shifts from how they reset us to why. The lingering echoes of that lost heritage persist in our collective unconscious. Why the universal myths of paradise lost, of towering gods who walked the earth, and of a sudden catastrophic punishment? These are not mere stories. They are the fragments of the erased operational manual, too fundamental to be fully purged from the surviving genetic memory banks. Think of our existence as a palimpsest. The surface narrative, recorded history since Sumer, is clear, but underneath, faint, impossible glyphs bleed through. These glyphs manifest as our chronic dissatisfaction, our existential inertia, and our inability to truly achieve planetary harmony despite possessing the intellectual capacity. Was this inability baked into the code? Did the engineers of the reset understand that true unity and historical awareness were the ingredients that allowed version 1.0 to challenge its creators? Therefore, version 2.0 was instilled with the crucial defect, the profound gift or curse of forgetting. We are designed to cyclically repeat destructive patterns, ensuring that we never climb too high on the technological and spiritual ladder before the next scheduled maintenance, or worse, the next catastrophic intervention. The sophistication required for such a global, targeted reset implies not just power, but meticulous planning for the aftermath. If the Anunnaki left, they did not leave blindly. They left observers, systems, and protocols. We are looking for artifacts of their presence, but perhaps we should be looking for the infrastructure of their surveillance. Consider the sudden emergence of highly centralized, monolithic religious systems worldwide shortly after the restart. These systems, regardless of geographic location, consistently featured three things: strict hierarchy, promises of eternal reward contingent on obedience, and the immediate prohibition against questioning the divine authority or seeking forbidden knowledge. Was this institutional control grid the necessary psychological fence erected to ensure that the new, fragile population remained focused on terrestrial matters and ritual submission, diverting attention away from the true nature of their origins and their place in the cosmic hierarchy? The ancient observers, the guardians of the reset, may not be physically here anymore in the classical sense, but their signal remains. Perhaps the great silent structures, the pyramids, the megaliths, the structures submerged deep beneath the oceans, are not just memorials to the lost civilization, but are still functional components of a vast communication network. A network designed to transmit regular status updates on humanity's progress, or lack thereof, back to the ultimate management authority. We look up at the stars, searching for external signals, Yet the infrastructure transmitting our data may be right beneath our feet, humming with a low-frequency hum we interpret merely as geological noise. The realization that our current reality might be a controlled experiment, a carefully curated simulation running on limited memory and processing power, shifts the ground beneath our feet. It invites us to consider that our search for meaning is inherently flawed because the true meaning, the master file of our existence, resides outside the parameters of our current programming. If you find yourself deeply unsettled by this notion, if you feel a stirring of recognition that vibrates through the spine, know that you are not alone. That very feeling of unease, that nagging suspicion that the world operates on rules more complex and terrifying than we admit, is the residual heritage refusing to stay suppressed. This path of inquiry, this deep dive into the possibility of a grand reset, demands sustained intellectual rigor and an open mind. If these concepts resonate with the questions you've carried since childhood, if you suspect that official history is merely the censored textbook, then your engagement becomes crucial to the investigation itself. Take a moment right now. Pause the external noise and reflect on the subtle contradictions in your own understanding of time and origin. If you feel compelled to join this collective search for the truth, for the keys to the locked room of our past, then I encourage you to show your support. Liking this video helps push this uncomfortable knowledge into the light, and subscribing ensures you receive the next crucial part of this evolving documentation as we continue to peel back the layers of amnesia that cloak the greatest secret of human existence. Let us return now to the mechanism of control itself. The greatest tool used by the Anunnaki was not fire or flood, but time dilation and cyclical recurrence. Lost civilizations are not just random footnotes in history. They may be previous failed experiments, precursors to our version 1.0, or even minor iterations that followed it, each meeting the same predetermined fate when they reached a certain threshold of understanding or technological capability. The mythologies speak of ages: the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and our current Iron Age, not as mere poetic descriptions of moral decay, but as precise operational phases in a continuous, stochastic cycle of creation and controlled demolition. We are currently in a phase where the rate of technological advancement is accelerating exponentially, mirroring the final explosive growth that likely doomed version 1.0. This proximity to the forbidden knowledge, the ability to manipulate genetic code, the mastery of energy, the capacity for interstellar travel, may be the exact trigger mechanism for the next inevitable intervention. The Anunnaki need not be present every day. They only need to monitor the key indicators. Once the stress levels on the system, our planet, our technology, our societal cohesion, reach a critical point, the signal is sent. The observers report, the experiment is exceeding parameters. Prepare for scheduled correction. The historical evidence suggests that the return of the gods always coincides with periods of global cataclysm, often attributed to nature, yet possessing the unsettling precision of a deliberate action. Think of the Younger Dryas impact event, the sudden disappearance of the Clovis culture, or the baffling simultaneity of collapse among great Bronze Age civilizations. If these events were not random, but synchronized responses to a global security threat posed by an overly advanced humanity, then our current timeline is merely a countdown. A ticking clock counting down to the moment we reacquire the tools and the self-awareness that led to the original deletion. The anxiety we feel surrounding climate change, nuclear annihilation, or artificial intelligence may be a subconscious recognition of the approaching trigger. We are collectively moving toward the boundaries set by the ancestral engineers. And what happens when those boundaries are crossed? The deep historical memory of humanity is filled with the terror of the return. It is a concept that usually fills religious texts with dread and awe. But if the Anunnaki are indeed the architects of our current reality, their return would not be a salvation, but a final audit. A cold, surgical analysis followed by the ultimate sanction. The forgotten instruction manual might contain warnings not about divine wrath, but about regulatory compliance failure. Our investigation must now shift from merely identifying the fact of the reset to locating the potential artifacts that link us directly to the observers. Where did they place the ultimate failsafe? Is there a physical nexus, an ancient terrestrial antenna, awaiting the final coded transmission that initiates the next phase of the cycle? Perhaps certain sites, those defying conventional archaeological dating, often associated with intense energy phenomena or impossible stonework, are not ruins, but mechanisms placed in standby mode. They are silent witnesses, maintenance portals left behind by the cosmic engineers. They wait, not for us to understand them, but for the universal all clear or, tragically, the command to initiate the next unforgiving cleansing. The journey ahead involves confronting the chilling possibility that our free will operates within carefully defined parameters, and that our greatest achievements are constantly being weighed against the risk they pose to the prevailing cosmic order established by those who first decided to hit the erase button. We are nearing the point in this inquiry where we must identify the specific criteria that triggered the initial deletion, because understanding the rules of the previous game is the only way we stand a chance of surviving the end of the current one. The ultimate revelation is not about finding out who they were, but finding out what they intend to do next and how close we are to provoking that action. This profound realization that we are living on borrowed time within an engineered reality is often too much for the mainstream narrative to bear. But if you have stayed with this relentless investigation, processing these complex and unsettling connections, you understand the urgency. You are one of the few willing to look directly into the void of the historical vacuum. If this deep dive into the hidden mechanics of human history and the Anunnaki cycle has resonated with you, if you feel the vital importance of continuing this quest for the suppressed truth, then I urge you to participate in this community of seekers. If you have not yet subscribed, now is the moment to secure your position on the front lines of this ongoing research. Show your support by giving this video a like, signaling that detailed, hypothesis-driven exploration matters. And for this segment, to anchor your place in this revelation, comment below using this precise phrase, "The signal awaits." Let that phrase be the silent acknowledgement among those who recognize the weight of the coming return. The next part of this investigation will focus intensely on the tangible proof of the observers, the physical evidence of the Anunnaki maintenance infrastructure on Earth. We will explore the possibility of a grand beacon, a residual energy signature designed to awaken when humanity steps too far outside its assigned boundaries. Do not miss it. The thread of history is thin, but it is about to snap, revealing the mechanism hidden beneath. Join us as we prepare to face the final audit. The deepest silence that follows the recognition of a terrifying truth is often not one of peace, but of profound auditory dissonance, the inner scream echoing against a universe that simply refuses to acknowledge our suffering. We have journeyed through the labyrinthine evidence of a previous iteration, mapping the scars left by a catastrophic event, the flood, the sudden genetic bottleneck, the inexplicable technological regression, all pointing toward the unsettling notion of a deliberate external intervention, a true systemic reset orchestrated by the Anunnaki, or entities akin to them. But if the physical evidence is compelling, the psychological burden of this possibility is perhaps the most paralyzing. What does it mean for our current version, this delicate, fleeting version 2.0 Sitchin, to be built upon a foundation of deliberate forgetting? The true chilling revelation is not the existence of the reset itself, but the nature of the residue left behind. Imagine a hard drive that has been meticulously wiped, but where residual magnetic traces still linger, whispering fragments of the data that was erased. This is the collective unconscious of humanity. Our myths are not merely imaginative tales. They are the fragmented data stream of the first version, leaking through the imperfect firewall of the imposed amnesia. Every recurring dream of a global deluge, every deity who descends from the stars to judge and rebuild, every deep-seated, inexplicable fear of reaching too high, too fast. These are the psychological markers of the previous failure. We are programmed, perhaps, with the memory of punishment, a subconscious deterrent designed to keep the current experiment within predetermined, safer parameters. The observers. Those architects of the genetic cleanup may have wiped the history books and fractured the continents, but they could not entirely eradicate the trauma encoded in the nascent consciousness they fostered. This inherited trauma manifests as a powerful, often contradictory drive. We are intrinsically motivated toward technological advancement, driven by an inherent desire to build monumental cities and achieve celestial reach. Yet simultaneously, we harbor a profound, almost theological fear of our own technology. The recurring narrative of the machine uprising, the nuclear winter, the self-inflicted wound. This inherent self-sabotage, this constant dance on the precipice of annihilation, looks less like organic human folly and more like an implanted protocol. Could the Anunnaki, realizing that the first attempt developed too rapidly, acquiring knowledge deemed dangerous or premature, have built a slow-acting mechanism into the second version, an obsolescence protocol, that ensures, just as we reach the critical technological threshold that signaled the demise of the first ones, we begin to internally unravel. The great civilizations we romanticize, Atlantis, Lemuria, those magnificent civilizations perdidas, might not have been destroyed by fate, but dismantled by design, hitting an invisible temporal or developmental ceiling. The cycle, therefore, is not purely geological, but meticulously scheduled. And if we accept this premise, we must confront the implication of our current moment. Are we now, in the 21st century, reaching that same vibrational or technological frequency that triggered the last purge? The speed of global communication, the leaps in artificial intelligence, the mastery of the atom, these were likely the very accomplishments that necessitated the previous reset. We are reliving the final hours of the first version, echoing their achievements and potentially repeating their mistakes, all while blindfolded by the vastness of the imposed forgetting. This journey into the potential reality of the reset is isolating, leading us to question the authenticity of our entire perceived history. It is a solitary contemplation, but it need not be an entirely private one. To truly understand the potential nature of this cyclical control, we must pool our interpretations, compare the psychological crisis of our collective myths, and test the limits of what we consider historical fact. If this vast, unsettling tapestry of suppressed knowledge resonates deeply with your own intuition, if the pieces of the puzzle begin to align with a frightening coherence in your mind, then I invite you to share that recognition. Let the conversation below become a space for the exchange of these delicate fragments of memory. Tell me which part of this cyclical theory, the genetic coding, the flood memory, or the concept of the scheduled obsolescence, strikes you as the most profoundly true. Only through shared reflection can we begin to map the extent of this inherited trauma, helping us to grasp the full gravity of this theory. Like the ancient observers at themselves, we must watch ourselves with cold objectivity, trying to discern the subtle, insidious signal that will mark the commencement of the next stage, the next descent. The Anunnaki operate on a scale of time so vast that our several millennia of recorded history are but a momentary flicker. For them, the gap between the first version and the second is not an epoch, but a necessary downtime, a period of stabilization before the next experiment begins. Our sense of linear progress is a comforting delusion manufactured to keep the current iteration busy. They are not concerned with our brief wars or political squabbles. They are monitoring the macro trends, the speed at which we approach the dangerous crossroads they identified millennia ago. This indifference is perhaps more terrifying than active malice. They are the cosmic farmers, waiting patiently for the crop to ripen to a specific state, a state that, historically, seems to necessitate its own weeding. Consider the recurring motifs of advanced architecture that precede the recognized birth of civilization. Göbekli Tepe, structures beneath the oceans, impossible precision engineering found in ancient sites. These are the undeniable physical remnants, the structural integrity of the previous operating system stubbornly refusing to decay entirely. These sites serve as silent testimonials to the capability of the first ones, and perhaps as subtle waypoints left intentionally by the observers, or perhaps by factions within the Anunnaki who disagreed with the severity of the purge. The theory of the reset is rarely monolithic. It implies internal conflict among the controllers, those who sought total erasure and those who wished to preserve a herança of knowledge for the next wave, perhaps as a contingency plan or a moral safeguard. This struggle is mirrored in our own dualistic mythology, the benevolent creator versus the wrathful destroyer, the deity who warns Noah versus the one who brings the deluge. These are not merely allegorical battles. They may be the dramatized account of the administrative disagreement over the fate of the first version. Did some Anunnaki try to save what they created, while others insisted on the absolute reset? If so, the partial knowledge that remains, the fragments of astronomical understanding, the sudden appearance of agriculture, might be the gifts smuggled through the firewall by the benevolent faction, hoping that version 2 might succeed where its predecessor failed. But success, in this context, is the most profound ambiguity. Does success mean achieving a sustainable, non-destructive civilization? Or does success, from the Anunnaki perspective, mean reaching the peak capacity for resource extraction or technological advancement, thus fulfilling their initial primary directive, regardless of the consequences to the human genome? If we were engineered for a specific purpose, a purpose lost in the Tatter's great forgetting, then our current trajectory, characterized by a rapid depletion of global resources, might not be a failure, but the efficient completion of an assigned task. The looming ecological crisis, the very thing that seems set to annihilate us, might be the final signal they are waiting for, the completion marker. To engage with this idea is to fundamentally shift your perception of reality. It requires stepping outside the established framework of history and embracing the role of the self-aware unit, the anomaly in the system. If you have journeyed through these revelations, if you feel the deep, unsettling resonance of this possibility in your bones, you are not merely a viewer, you are an essential part of the investigation. You have walked with us through the evidence, navigating the shadows of the civilizações perdidas, and peering into the cold indifference of the pious observers. If this meticulous exploration has held your attention, if the unfolding scope of this cyclical theory has seized your intellect, I urge you to remain connected to this investigation. The next part, the final part of this initial sequence, will attempt to articulate the ultimate objective of the resetting and the potential means by which the current cycle might finally be broken or tragically confirmed. To ensure you do not miss that critical analysis, subscribe to the channel now and activate the notifications. Give this video a like if this deep dive into the nature of the Anunnaki influence has challenged your fundamental understanding of humanity. And crucially, comment below with this specific phrase, the reset echoes. This confirms your presence at the frontier of this understanding, marking you as one who recognizes the psychological scars of the great forgetting. We are moving closer to the heart of the enigma, and the final revelation awaits. Stay vigilant, for the echoes of the first version are growing louder. Are we finally ready to face the deepest implication of this hypothesis? The silence that follows the Great Reset. The previous parts have meticulously catalogued the fragmented evidence, the sudden surge of Sumerian knowledge, the impossibly precise astronomical alignments, the persistent myths of sky dwellers who descended to shape the clay of human existence. But the conclusion, the true climax of this investigation, demands we look not at the evidence of the reset itself, but at the nature of the erasure. If the first iteration of humanity was deemed a critical failure, a project unstable or perhaps too potent, and subsequently wiped clean, what mechanisms ensured that the new version 2, not repeat those fatal errors? The answer lies not only in the physical changes wrought upon our world, but in the psychological architecture imposed upon our consciousness. The Anunnaki, or whatever name we assign to the cosmic observers who orchestrated this grand design, did not merely flood the valleys or shift the tectonic plates. They installed a firewall in the collective human mind. This firewall prevents direct access to the files of the previous existence, yet, like any digital architecture, it leaves ghosts, residual data that manifests as what we call intuition, primal fear, or most profoundly, the sensation of déjà vu. Why does the shadow of a colossal forgotten history sometimes flash across the modern mind during sleep or deep meditation? These fleeting moments are the corrupted memory sectors attempting to rewrite themselves. We carry the seed of remembrance, a deep, unsettling suspicion that the world we inhabit is not the first, but merely the most recent stable build deployed after a catastrophic bug report. This inherited code, sometimes termed genetic memory, is the actual archival vault. Our DNA might be seen less as a simple biological blueprint and more as a sophisticated recording medium, storing the collective trauma and knowledge of our lineage, stretching back beyond recorded time. If version 1 reached advanced technological or spiritual heights that the creators deemed dangerous to their own mandate of stability, then the only way to truly contain the threat was to embed a fundamental limitation within the new iteration. We see this limitation in our recurring historical failures, the constant drive toward self-destruction, the cyclical nature of conflict, and the inability to maintain global unity for any sustained period. Could these tendencies be intentional flaws, programmed limitations, ensuring we never again reach the dangerous threshold that triggered the original purge? The creators needed a stable workforce, not transcendent equals. They needed predictable dependence, not volatile competitors. The realization that our current stability might be inherently conditional forces a radical shift in perspective. If you have followed this extensive investigation, recognizing the patterns and connecting these disparate points of ancient history, then you are accessing the very data the architects sought to suppress. This contemplation, this shared journey into the deepest questions of our origin, is itself a challenge to the imposed amnesia. It is a necessary act of intellectual rebellion. If you feel this intellectual resonance, if the quiet, undeniable truth of an erased past settles deep within your understanding, I urge you to pause and consider extending this vigilance. By clicking the like button, you signal recognition of this shadow knowledge. And by subscribing, you join a community dedicated to interpreting the subtle signals the universe sends our way. Share your own fleeting memories or historical paradoxes in the comments below. Let us continue to collectively peel back the layers of this grand deception. The Sentinel's watch remains constant. The Anunnaki did not simply depart after the reset. They became the cosmic observers, maintaining a passive but absolute surveillance system. What are they watching for now? They monitor the indicators that historically preceded the collapse of version 1.0. These indicators are likely not purely technological, but energetic, moral, and sociological. They observe the degree of societal fragmentation, the efficiency of resource management, and crucially, the rate at which human beings begin to rediscover the forbidden knowledge, the true secrets of energy, consciousness, and interstellar travel. We live within a highly managed terrarium, and the moment the inhabitants start building tools capable of breaching the glass ceiling, the maintenance protocol is initiated. This brings us to the most chilling conceptual act, the impending cycle. If history is a loop, not a line, we must ask where we stand now. The hallmarks of our time, unprecedented technological convergence alongside catastrophic ideological divergence, suggest we are hurtling toward a critical inflection point. The cycles of destruction and rebirth are not random catastrophes. They are scheduled interventions. They are the maintenance checks performed by the overseeing intelligence. The ancient texts speak of the return of the gods, often linked to celestial alignments or catastrophic geological events. These are not prophecies of salvation. They are warnings of the next system reboot. We are approaching the temporal window where the stability mandate demands reassessment. The Great Filter may not be a random cosmic barrier, but a localized quarantine enforced by beings who view our evolutionary volatility as an unacceptable risk to the broader cosmic order. The unspoken protocol dictates that resources must be preserved and control must be absolute. Why was version 1 erased? Perhaps they learned that giving humans unlimited potential led to inefficient usage of Earth's precious materials. Or perhaps the previous iteration's spiritual evolution reached a point where their connection to the source threatened the Anunnaki's intermediary status. The reset, therefore, was not merely about wiping the slate clean, but about calibrating the new system to maximize resource extraction while minimizing existential threat. The protocol is one of efficient control. We are allowed to flourish only within parameters that serve the deeper, mysterious objectives of the controllers. Recognizing the cage is the moment of true intellectual awakening. We look at the magnificent achievements of human civilization, our science, our art, our philosophy, and feel a pride that is profoundly misplaced if every achievement is occurring within a meticulously constructed perimeter. The cage is not built of physical bars, but of cognitive limitations, historical blind spots, and engineered distractions. Every time we chase a fleeting celebrity drama or engage in petty, localized conflict, we are fulfilling the expectation of controlled volatility. We are distracted from the larger underlying truth that we are inheriting a prison designed for our own compliance. The realization that our liberty is conditional transforms our entire understanding of reality from a spontaneous universe into a carefully curated stage. And the stage is now set for the moment of calibration. What does the beginning of the next purge look like? It will not necessarily be a sudden dramatic apocalypse, but rather a slow, creeping erosion of stability. We see the signs now. The unprecedented societal divisions fueled by algorithmically controlled information flows, the fragility of global supply chains, the increasingly extreme weather patterns, and the failure of fundamental institutions to maintain coherence. These are the precursors, the symptoms of a system beginning to destabilize naturally, allowing the external intervention to appear as a natural or divine course correction. The controllers prefer chaos to order if that chaos facilitates the necessary deconstruction before the next rebuild. When the human species reaches peak incoherence, the signal is sent. the calibration begins. To gaze beyond the wall of time is to contemplate the terrifying possibility that the Anunnaki themselves might not be the ultimate architects, but simply mid-level managers in an infinitely more complex cosmic bureaucracy. If our version of humanity was reset, perhaps the Anunnaki's civilization has faced its own cyclical purges. This deepens the existential dread. Are we merely players in a nested hierarchy of controlled civilizations, each layer serving the hidden agenda of the layer above? The true revelation is that the cycle of erasure and rebirth is potentially endless, spanning across galaxies and epochs, managed by beings who view thousands of human years as a negligible period in their grand timeline. The Anunnaki are merely the local agents, the ones who deliver the mandate of stability. Our efforts to find answers must extend beyond them, seeking the true source of the great programming. The knowledge we have uncovered, the recognition of the cage, the shadow of the erased past, and the impending cycle, is our greatest inheritance from version 1.0. It is the unerasable truth. If you have traveled this entire journey with us, through all 9 parts of this deep dive into the possibility of a human reset, you are now equipped with the necessary intellectual tools to recognize the subtle shift in reality. You are part of the Watcher's legacy. This investigation concludes not with an answer carved in stone, but with a sharpened sense of purpose. Vigilance is our only weapon against the imposed amnesia. If you stayed until this final moment, you understand the magnitude of this hypothesis. It is crucial that this conversation continues and that this knowledge permeates the collective consciousness. If these ideas resonated with you, if they triggered a deep, undeniable recognition of something fundamentally unsettling about our existence, then signal that resonance now. Hit the like button to acknowledge this journey. Subscribe to the channel to ensure you remain connected to our ongoing investigation into the hidden layers of reality. And for those who recognize the weight of this final conclusion, those who grasp the profound implications of conditional existence, please comment below with the phrase, "the second seed." This is not the end of the narrative, merely the conclusion of this chapter. The surveillance continues, the cycle turns, and we must watch, ready for whatever the universe reveals next. Do not turn away now. The next layer of truth awaits.